This week, what we are doing in this class, Raj Patel. Raj Patel is a personal friend of mine because when I transitioned into the food movement, I went from Green for All in Oakland, California, yay, to Slow Food USA in Brooklyn, New York, yay, and really wanted to learn more about the global food system and what was happening internationally, because I'd been hearing some scary things. So Raj Patel wrote a book called Food Rebellions in collaboration with Eric Holt Jimenez at Food First, and it was an edited collection of stories, case studies, and a description of the global food economy. That book, that's the longest book I have ever read. Not because it's actually a long book, but because it is so thick, full of information. Every paragraph I had to put my head down and absorb for a second. So part of why I say this is because this man is really smart. And if you can actually absorb what he's talking about tonight, your mind will be blown. He also has the added benefit of being very funny and extremely entertaining to watch. So you are really in for a treat. And now, who is Raj Patel? He's a writer, activist, and an academic. He has worked for the World Bank and the WTO and protested against them around the world. He is currently a visiting scholar at UC Berkeley Center for African Studies, an honorary research fellow at the School of Development Studies at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Yeah, I got that right. And he is also a fellow at the Institute for Food and Development Policy, also known as Food First. Please give a warm round of applause to Raj Patel.
Hello. They have us tethered now so that we don't float away. But good evening. We have about 40 minutes to talk about everything. And by everything, I mean everything. We're going to talk about the global food system. And so in the next 40 minutes, what I want to do is tell you what it is and why it is responsible for us living in a world where there are 1 billion people, more or less, who are undernourished and 1.5 billion people who are overweight. Now, there used to be a time where being overweight was a sign of wealth. Where if you were portly and slightly pudgy, you were in command of a great many resources and in command of your time sufficiently that you didn't have to exercise by working, and therefore you were able to accumulate an extra pound or two. These days, however, being overweight and being undernourished are 2 points on a continuum of poverty. If you are undernourished, the chances are that you are living in the global south, and the chances are that you are in rural areas, and the chances are that you are a woman or a girl. 60% of the people going hungry today are women or girls, 60% of people who are undernourished. In the United States, we have not so much a problem of undernourishment, but we certainly have food insecurity. In the United States, we have nearly 50 million people who, at some point during last year, didn't know where their next meal was coming from. And the group that was most likely to be food insecure were female-headed households. 35% of US households, so female-headed US households were food insecure. They didn't know where their next meal was coming from. Now, how do we get to a position where the hungry, the people who are overweight and people who are undernourished are 2 points on the same continuum? Well, in order to understand this, other people, I believe, use PowerPoint, but I like to kick it old school and encourage you to use your imaginations. So if you can imagine, for me, an hourglass, so wide at the top, narrow in the middle, and wide at the bottom. Wide at the top, narrow, and wide. At the top, there are the millions of farmers around the world who grow food for us. And at the bottom, there are the nearly 7 billion people who try to eat every day if we can. But in the middle, there are just a handful of corporations that run the global food system. In other words, a handful of corporations that worry about the truck and barter of goods from farm to fork. And in any major commodity globally, there are about 4 or 5, possibly 6 corporations that control the majority of the market, the global market in that commodity. So, for example, the global packaged tea industry is 95% run by one corporation, by Unilever. But the global grain trade is run by the ABCD of global grain trading companies, Archer Daniels Midland and Bunge and Cargill and Dreyfus. So in every major market you have a few corporations concentrating that power. And when they concentrate that power, they do what corporations ought. They maximize shareholder value. They're in the business of making profit, and you do that by buying cheap and selling dear. And when you buy cheap in the agricultural world, that means you pay your workers as little as you can, and you pay as little as you can for the inputs, for the food itself. And that goes some way to explaining why it is that even in the United States, when you look at people who are the poorest paid in this country, the people who are living in conditions of slavery-like conditions, say in southern Florida, you'll find that they are in the agricultural labor. And that problem, of course, is much deeper in the global south. But on the other hand, these corporations are also in the business of adding value to the extent that they can, and getting us to eat food that is profitable. And of course, that means eating food that is rich in the salt and the fat and the sugar. And so what you have, particularly in countries like ours and in Europe, if you look at the income and obesity correlations, you find that it is the rich increasingly who are whose body mass index approaches normal, and it is the poorer you get, the more likely you are to be overweight. And so poverty is a sign of having insufficient funds to be able to control your diet in a way that leads you to be able to access good, clean, healthy, fair food.